Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to near the end of week 3 of our Migration Summit. We're really excited to have you here today and for what will prove to be a really exciting session. My name is Lorraine Charles, and I'm really happy to have you here today. Give me one sec. Here we go. The Migration Summit 2022, organized by MIT Refugee Action Hub, NAML, Quran Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab, is a month-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, non-profits and NGOs, social enterprises, foundations, philanthropists, researchers, policymakers, employers, and governments around key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities. This year, we're exploring the theme of education and workforce development and displacement through virtual events hosted by participating partners around the world. Today, I'm really excited to have an organization that I've been speaking to a lot, and other people from different organizations who are also quite familiar to a lot of you. In this panel, which is hosted by Konexio, we'll be exploring the possibilities for innovating livelihood programming for displaced people. These innovations include collaboration across initiatives, broadening impact through Train the Trainer program, and aligned impact evaluation. I'm going to introduce Jean, who will sort of moderate everyone. Jean is the co-founder and executive director of Konexio. Jean founded Konexio based on experience immigrating to the US at a young age, where she witnessed firsthand the social and financial struggles faced by immigrants. 4 years after starting Konexio, Forbes ranked her as one of the most influential 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs in Europe. Jean, I'm so delighted to have you here today, and the rest of the panel. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants. We're really excited to be talking about these, subject areas that are really close to our work. Echoing what Lorraine just said, a great welcome to this session on multi-sectoral approaches, where we'll be discussing how to work across the NGO, corporate, government sectors to create innovative projects with a focus on refugee livelihoods. According to the World Bank, up to 4 in 5 refugees today lack income generating employment, and they also typically earn wages that are 35 to 45% lower than the host population. Due to some of these barriers that they face, the nature of them are intersectional, and so the collaboration in between different sectors is essential in creating sustainable solutions. Our goal today in this session is to really spark ideas for how to work together better to tackle these issues. So thanks, Lorraine, for the kind introduction. I will be moderating the discussion today. And now I'd like to introduce briefly our panelists, more in alphabetical order. I will start with Rediet Kasaye, who is Program Manager of the Refugee Livelihoods Initiative of the Ikea Foundation. He is a development professional with 18 years of experience in designing and managing projects focused on community development, child and youth development, advocacy, and financial and economic inclusion of vulnerable communities. We also are happy to have Nicol, who is Policy Officer at the U.S. Department of State, the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, leading work on relief and development programs, cash programming as well, and multilateral development bank engagement. And last but not least, we are excited to re-invite Simar Singh, who is a Senior Program Manager at RefugePoint, where she leads the implementation of global initiatives and partnerships on Refugee SelfReliance. She also serves as the agency lead for the Refugee SelfReliance initiative, a multi-stakeholder collaboration that promotes opportunities for refugees around the world to become more self-reliant and achieve a better quality of life. So thank you to everyone who is listening in and joining us today. In terms of how we are going to proceed in the next hour or so, We'll start off today with some discussion questions to get this conversation going. And then we'll also be able to transition to audience questions and participation. So don't hesitate as we're having discussions, and I'll be asking and starting with the panelists on some of the questions already prepared, to send any questions, comments that you may have to the Zoom chat. And we'll be keeping an eye on these and hopefully be able to get to them at the end of the session. So maybe to kick it off, I'd like to direct the first question to Simar to really think about, in the context where we're at, to define, first of all, Refugee SelfReliance. What is it and why is it so important?
Great, thank you so much, Jean. It's great to be here for this important conversation. So I'll start with the definition for refugee self-reliance. It's defined as the social and economic ability of an individual, a household, or a community to meet its essential needs in a sustainable manner. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but at its core, it's really a simple yet a very powerful idea. Self-reliance is about supporting refugees to be able to take care of themselves and their families without being constantly dependent on humanitarian assistance. It's about creating opportunities for refugees to access dignified livelihoods that enable them to improve their quality of life and to build resilience against future shocks, whether it's a serious illness in the family or a global pandemic. To get to the second part of your question about why it's important, why are we here today talking about it, it's helpful to take a bit of a step back and consider the wider context of displacement. So broadly speaking, for the last several years, the global displacement crisis has been quickly outpacing solutions. The number of displaced people keeps growing annually. It's estimated to hit over 100 million people this year, including over 30 million refugees. Those who are displaced are remaining so for longer periods of time. 80% of all refugees are displaced on average for between 10 to 25 years. And the system that has been set up to provide lasting solutions for refugees is just unable to keep up. In recent years, less than 3% of all refugees have been able to be resettled to a third country, to return home, or to legally integrate into their host country. The remaining 97% are left in a state of limbo, dependent on short-term aid, waiting for the promise of a better life that may take years, if ever, to materialize. So what we need is a different approach, one that can help all refugees, but in particular, those 97% who will likely not be able to access a durable solution in any given year. And that's really where self-reliance comes in. It's an approach that reorients assistance from only focusing on short-term emergency aid to also opening up opportunities for refugees to rebuild their lives, to utilize their skills to contribute to the communities that they live in, while also strengthening their long-term resilience. It's an approach that moves from focusing only on needs and vulnerabilities of refugees to also emphasizing strengths and skills within refugee families and communities. It's important to mention that self-reliance is not a new concept, and globally, it is recognized as a key solution to this growing displacement crisis. Self-reliance is one of the 4 key objectives of the Global Refugee Compact, something that's been affirmed by almost every country at the United Nations. Self-reliance is also at the heart of the Sustainable Development Agenda. But most importantly, it's what refugees tell us that they want. We've, in our work supporting refugee communities, we repeatedly hear from refugees that their experiences have led them to become really weary of dependence on unreliable or short-term assistance. Instead, what they're looking for is a chance to work, a chance to provide for themselves and their family, and to rebuild their lives in their host communities and host countries. And that's really what self-reliance is all about.
Thank you so much. And so I think maybe I'll pass it over to the two other panelists, given that, we have this clear definition of refugee self-reliance. How does that fit in with Rediet, with with Ikea Foundation, Anna also respectively, with your organization's overall goals and vision?
Thank you, Jean. For Ikea Foundation, it has a broader vision of creating a better everyday life for many people. This is a broader vision, and the many people we are talking about is everyone that deserves a better life, which means the whole world. Of course, as a foundation, we may not be able to reach the whole world, but we can contribute for that. It focuses on improving the lives of vulnerable children, especially by enabling their families and parents to create a sustainable livelihoods, and also to fight and cope with climate change, with a mission of creating better lives in a livable planet. So these are two combined things that we're looking at. And to address this, the foundation has 5 different portfolio teams that it supports. One is refugee livelihood that I'm representing, employment and entrepreneurship, agricultural livelihoods, climate action, and renewable energy. So you can see where the division comes in terms of livable planet, better life. The better life broadly looks at refugee livelihoods, employment, entrepreneurship, and agricultural livelihood, and the other 2 looks at livable planet. Of course, you cannot, improving livelihoods by itself may not be sufficient, because we also need to take care of the planet. Taking care of the planet by itself without taking care of the people that live in it might also not be sustainable. So how to balance it? Of course, families need both financial stability, healthy environment, if they and their children need to thrive in the community that they are living in. Coming to refugees, how did it fit? Of course, refugees, historically, one of the foundation's investments at the early ages is looking at refugees because of the magnitude of the problem and the fact that it's not a priority in terms of self-reliance when the foundation starts its refugee self-reliance program 10 years ago. As we all know, that most of the support is humanitarian, addressing immediate needs, but the livelihood support was not there. So there was a need. The magnitude of the crisis was high. It's getting worse by the day. So that's where it fits in. And for the foundation, self-reliance means restoring dignity, because when you're forced to live from where you are, despite you may lose your assets, you may leave your country, but through all that, you're losing dignity. How do we restore that dignity for the individual, and which means it's a security for the family and an added value for the community that's hosting them. Of course, when you look at all these things, we need to make sure that we are working with the broader community that's hosting them. That way we are creating a kind of a comprehensive community development. This is how it fits into the planet and individual support. Thank you, Jean.
Thanks so much. I think it's really important as we're talking about dignity, overall well-being, I think, and thinking also at the family unit, these are definitely very important questions, and also thinking about it in the context of collaboration. Maybe it's over to you, Anna.
Sure, thank you, Jean. I really don't have too much more to add, I think, from my other colleagues' addition, so I'll keep it a little short, but I think it's really absolutely critical for PRM's work as the Humanitarian Bureau of the State Department. So really, we're coming at this question from the humanitarian donor and policymaking side. Part of our mission is really supporting solutions for forcibly displaced people. And so we're looking at forcibly displaced populations, including refugees, stateless people, IDPs, migrants in situations of vulnerability, and other people who have been uprooted from their homes. And so self-reliance really underpins the success of those solutions. And not just the 3 durable solutions for refugees, including local integration, voluntary return, or resettlement, although I think self-reliance is really important for positioning people to be successful when they do find those solutions. But it's really also about what we used to call kind of interim solutions. And I think Simar was mentioning this a little bit as well. To build on some of her comments of things that we're seeing is really last year PRM funded RAND to undertake research. And in that research, they found that only 1 in 3 refugees will return home within 10 years. And I imagine that if they had looked at data that was more recent, that might even be more expanded. And they recognize that only a small percentage of refugees find durable solutions every year. So we as a humanitarian and development community must really increase our focus on improving the well-being and dignity for refugees in their current reality until they can find a durable solution. So this is really a core part of PRM's diplomacy and advocacy that we're working on. I think that this has really required a shift in how we frame and respond to refugee crises. We as a humanitarian actor are recognizing that from the onset of a crisis that yes, these refugees will have immediate life-saving needs, but they will also likely need to think about accessing long-term healthcare, getting their children in school, and reestablishing their livelihoods. Like all of us, refugees have diverse needs and ambitions that stretch outside of a single sector. Again, I would say Simar made really good points about the Global Compact on Refugees, and I think that this really self-reliance is foundational to a lot of what we were saying and advancing through the Global Compact on Refugees. And it's a critical framework for bringing together a much more diverse set of actors that are needed to respond and enable this to move forward. I think we made 3 different pledges at the high-level officials meeting this past December, advancing and supporting self-reliance, including one of the pledges that Simar, your organization, made. So I think it really demonstrates how profoundly important self-reliance is to our work. Finally, I would emphasize Simar's point as well that it's also the right thing to do, and it's what most people want as well. We're really striving for a refugee-centered approach, and it's core to protection, and refugees don't want to put their lives on hold for 2, 3, or even 10 years as we're increasingly seeing. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
No, thank you. And I think as we're seeing also over the years and the different kind of areas, we see that also there's, back to what you're saying, Anna, there's no one specific need. There are going to be increasingly different needs as we move on over time, given also the nature and diversity of skill sets, talents, professional projects, life pathways, and how do you kind of develop and be able to address all those will be really important in the future years. Maybe one of the core questions that gets at one of the questions we asked behind this panel is, how do we think about doing this with a multi-sectoral approach, and how do we also bring together partners from these different sectors to address these more diverse needs? And so maybe a question to all panelists is thinking about this in this context. How does your organization really try and leverage maybe cross-sectoral partnerships to work towards self-reliance? Do you have specific examples that you can talk about, and also what made perhaps that collaboration particularly successful? And open to whoever wants to start.
Maybe I'll jump in first. I think we do this through several different modalities, and particularly I'm thinking about we do this both through our programming and our policy. I think in terms of programming, one thing we are really excited about is the Refugee SelfReliance Initiative's work, and we've been supporting them for several years in their community practice. I won't speak too much about it because Simar has much more wisdom, I think, to impart on, to this group about much of their work. But I think one key thing to take away from their work, and particularly the Self-Reliance Index, is an understanding of how interlinked and complex needs are, that we need to work across sectors to be effective. So even if a refugee household has 2 sets of income, a single medical crisis or a chronic illness could dramatically set them back if they don't have access to healthcare. So it's not just one sector that's going to position people for success. I think taking a much more individualized approach to assessing and addressing needs rather than applying a single sectoral approach to a population seems to be much more effective. We are seeing a lot more case management approaches and encouraging our partners to think about working across sectors and layering interventions, which I think brings me to the graduation approach. I think recognizing that we needed to explore much more sustainable approaches that deliver longer term results for refugees. We supported Trickle Up, I think starting in 2016 and then finalized in 2018 to provide assistance to UNHCR and other NGOs to test the graduation approach in refugee contexts. And it's really shown immense promise as a method to sustainably lift the most vulnerable populations out of poverty and foster self-reliance. And I think one of the reasons it has done so is because it looks at needs across sectors and at the household level. It's really been great, I think, to see the Poverty Alleviation Coalition really take the graduation approach and expand this to so many more contexts. And I think just last year, we were supporting graduation approach programming in nine different countries. I think I would add in terms of policy as well, and interpreting cross-sector, I think very broadly, I think engagement across humanitarian and development actors is really critical. In addition to programming, I think self-reliance really requires us to forge these new partnerships for the Global Compact on Refugees. And improving this collaboration across the humanitarian and development divide is really core to promoting refugee inclusion in national systems and helping those displaced become much more self-reliant. And so we've seen the World Bank really kind of step up into this space and do a lot of work, particularly with the Global Concessional Financing Facility and the IDA-19 window for host communities and refugees. And this has been really game-changing in terms of thinking about the development sector and their role in ensuring that we can promote sustainable solutions for refugees and think about self-reliance. Thanks.
Great, and I can jump in as well. For RefugePoint, from our perspective, when we're considering how to help refugees improve their lives, at the highest level, we are really looking to shift the paradigm of humanitarian response to create more opportunities for refugees to become self-reliant. We want more humanitarian agencies to be implementing self-reliance programming. We want funders to fund this work. We want governments to create enabling environments for the refugees they host. And importantly, we want programming and policies to reflect the priorities of refugee communities themselves. And so this sort of really broad ambition to shift the paradigm, to transform humanitarian response, really calls for creative partnerships and new ways of working together, pulling in perspectives across different disciplines and stakeholders. And it's very much the approach that RefugePoint takes in all of our work. Anna mentioned the Refugee SelfReliance initiative. I think that's a very good illustration of this collaborative approach that brings in sort of thoughts and perspectives across different sectors. The initiative was created and is co-led by RefugePoint along with the Women's Refugee Commission. And it was really created as a way to facilitate this larger paradigm shift. The initiative serves as a global convening space for action, learning, and collaboration on self-reliance. And it really brings together people and agencies working across different sectors to exchange knowledge, to learn from one another, and to create new and more effective ways in which to strengthen refugee lives and livelihoods. Part of the reason it does that is in recognition of what Anna mentioned, which is when we are talking about self-reliance, it is a multi-dimensional concept. It's not only about livelihoods, but it really does focus on the social and economic experience of refugees' lives, of anyone's life who, who we're taking into account. And so it's really important to have perspectives from across the development humanitarian spectrum, but also to have representatives coming in from the government perspective, from the private sector, from the humanitarian NGO sector as well. So our global community for the initiative is growing. We have over 40 agencies at the moment that includes representatives from international NGOs, community-based organizations, refugee-led organizations, UN agencies, think tanks, researchers, government, and private funders. And it's really by having all of those voices in the room together that we're able to understand the different opportunities and challenges across the entire system that we're trying to transform. It's also how we catalyze innovative collaborations that will help make that happen. Anna, you mentioned this already, but I think one perfect example of the fruit of this cross-sectoral collaboration is the Self-Reliance Index, a tool that the members of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative developed collaboratively. It's a tool that's helping many organizations improve their self-reliance programs and is building an evidence base of what works to help refugees become and stay more self-reliant. It was, again, designed by members of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, which is this diverse group, and its development was supported by several different funders, also bringing their own perspectives, ranging from government donors to various philanthropic partners, including the Ikea Foundation and PRM. So again, I think that's a really good example of an innovative solution that is really the fruit of collaboration and partnership.
Okay, I think what to add after this? I think Simar, you covered most of the collaboration that's taking place in the sector in the refugee livelihood space, but just looking at the Ikea Foundation, how it operates. Overall, the foundation looks at partnership. It is at its core, collaboration at its core at different levels. And some of the initiatives mentioned by Simar were also part of either directly or through our partners. So collaboration makes, it's a pillar of the foundation. When it comes to refugee livelihoods, of course, we are implementing in partnership across different sectors, and also looking at how we can create impactful, meaningful interventions. We cannot do it alone. Just this is the common say: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. When you say together, it means everyone that has a stake in anything that we do. Of course, if you do things alone, we can achieve quick things, but the whole discussion around sustainability, larger impact may not be there. This approach that we take is somehow amplified through the three pillars that we follow in our portfolio: innovation, looking at direct program delivery, direct with community engagement, strong partners, by engaging different players. And also we're looking at advocacy, and which means working with different bodies, conduct research at the country, regional, and global level, conduct advocacy initiatives to facilitate the inclusion of refugees at different levels in different settings. We also look at integration. Integration being how development actors, funders, and other agencies consider refugee livelihood as a key programming aspect. That way we'll have enough resource, enough policy support, and it is somehow institutionalized instead of just something as extra. Through these three areas, innovation, advocacy, and integration, we are supporting around 30 programs that looks at collaboration with several actors in the sector. Primarily, our direct partner organizations, usually civil society groups, bilateral, multilateral institutions. And of course, through these entities, we collaborate with the relevant government bodies in different countries, regional bodies, the private sector, which will also come to, and also refugees and host community members. Refugee-led organizations, their importance is becoming even more relevant during and after the COVID situation that we face, donor agencies, academic institutions. What I think in terms of, sometimes I think which collaboration works, but anything that brings in collaboration, usually it is effective at different levels. It would be difficult for me to pick a specific example of where we have been successful or our partners have been successful. But in most cases, when we bring different actors together, the results are great. It helps us to go beyond what we want to achieve. So I think cross-sectoral collaboration is key, and I hope everyone will pick on this and then continue routes going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think, and I probably think we're, all here, given that we have this interest in making sure that we see different perspectives. And I know that, for example, Ikea Foundation, you guys are also part, for example, of the TENT partnership as well, which is a collaboration of different companies who are focused on employment. Something I think specifically at Konexio, given that we also have the specific maybe bias on skills and the role of trying to develop, human capital, making sure that people are able to properly skilled to work towards achieving self-reliance. I'd be really curious to think about in the organizations that you support or in the organizations that you collaborate with, what each of your perspective on the role of upskilling is in regard to self-reliance. Are there specific skill sets that you think are more important as we look towards the future as well?
I can come in since my the speaker is on. I look at it, of course, upskilling is key, but usually in refugee settings, reskilling is also quite key. And we look at these combined things because refugees left their place of residence, but they brought their skills, they brought their hands, their leg, their knowledge. They were teachers in the past, they were doctors, they were farmers, they were traders. They just left their space. And when they come to the new place, of course, they have to adjust to new areas, the new context, what are the skills needed? And based on that, they need to adapt to the context. In this case, the whole idea of upskilling is important. If you look at professional jobs, you need to get an equivalence, a certification to function, also to get into the system and employed by the official institutions. But looking at reskilling is also quite a key component because the skill that you have at home may not be relevant in the place that you move to. So we're also open looking at supporting our partners to work with refugees to develop new skills. Something that they, of course, they need to have the test, they need to have the energy and also the interest, but looking at what is in the market, what's available, what's viable in the market. We need to look at both these two things as a balance. Of course, context may vary depending on the country. Okay, I think people eventually will need to create their own jobs, but we can help them, our partner can help them to scale their business ideas by giving them different trainings, coaching, continuous support. For this to happen, everyone needs to come together. Not a single entity can achieve that. So I will look at it both from reskilling and upskilling components. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. On that question for Anna or Simar?
Yeah, I can jump in there and just sort of, I would echo a couple of the things that Rediet mentioned, particularly thinking about the importance of taking a market-based approach. So I think one of the things that's been incredibly helpful in the refugee space is having this conversation about upskilling. It's really important to recognize that there is so much potential when we're thinking of the digital economy, when we're thinking of digital skills, thinking of some of the challenges or the restrictions that refugees face in perhaps not always being able to freely interact in the local economies where they work, to transact and participate, but perhaps to have more opportunities to participate in the global economy. So, thinking creatively about what kind of skills might be a good match for the realities in which refugees are living. At the same time, I think it's also incredibly important to consider where the real opportunities are and what will it actually take in terms beyond providing a skills training program to create viable, sustainable pathways for employment. Again, whether that's as part of the global economy, whether that's part of the local economy. And so I think having everything anchored with a market-based approach. So really thinking carefully about what investments are made into upskilling or reskilling programs, and making sure that those are linked to sort of practical steps that all of us have had to go through in our careers: apprenticeships, internships, sort of pathways to that full employment, to make sure that we're building all of those pathways so that we're not upskilling refugees and making sure that they're adding to their many credentials and then many important papers, but are then sort of leaving them without that really crucial linkage to employment. So I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind. Another part that I would highlight is, particularly from the NGO perspective, from the humanitarian NGO perspective, it's also important to think about, for the diverse refugee communities and displaced communities that we work with, sometimes in addition to the upskilling and reskilling programs, there's often quite a bit more that we can do to get a family or an individual ready to fully participate and benefit from those programs. That might be making sure that the kids in the household are in school, so that the breadwinners have the opportunity to go out and participate in a program and then work. It might be making sure that the household is connected to a health insurance program, so that if there's a disabled member of the family or someone with a chronic illness, they have their needs met. Again, as all of us know from our lives, these are really things that can keep folks out of the labor force. And it's important to consider these things alongside any investments in upskilling. Thank you.
I entirely agree with both of those very good comments, and I don't have too much to add, except that I would reiterate, I think, some of those really strong points that came out, that I think for us, it really depends on the context. And I think particularly in refugee situations, what we're really looking for is for many of our partners to clearly understand what the barriers are for many of these people in getting a livelihood and becoming self-reliant. So in our NGO guidelines, we request that any partner undertaking a livelihoods activity should do those market assessments first, understand what sectors have a lot of demand, and also understand what refugees are interested in and what existing skills they already bring to the table, and making sure that we're matching those up. People aren't going to be successful if you're kind of wedging them into some sort of livelihood activity that isn't a good fit for them. I know if you had placed me, if you had told me that I need to become like a shoe seller, I would not be successful in that intervention. So it's also, part of it is understanding what refugees are interested in, what their needs are. I think also kind of building on what Simar was just saying too, is refugees face particularly strong barriers in terms of the local legal environment. Do refugees have the right to work? If so, are there still bureaucratic challenges that they face in working, including regularization, work permits, business permits, or in many contexts, we're also seeing that work permits limit their employment to only specific sectors. So many of our partners are working to support refugees or employers navigate this process that's already pretty confusing and sometimes a little bit pricey. So really an understanding of all of these barriers is really important to make an informed decision about livelihoods programming. I think many times upskilling is needed to overcome some of these barriers. Trainings that we're supporting, usually we encourage that they are linked with other interventions as well. I think Simar was getting to this as well. It's important that we think about, how people are paying for childcare. So oftentimes our partners are providing cash and voucher assistance to pay for childcare so that people can go to work. Usually, we've had a couple of programs that are providing stipends for people entering the formal labor market until they can get their first paycheck so that they can support themselves and their basic needs until that first paycheck comes. So I think really it depends on the context. I think in terms of the different trainings that we're seeing undertaken in some of our programs, it could be anything from a really specific technical area, including computer software, mechanics, cooking. I think when we're looking at entrepreneurial activities, we're seeing a lot of business and financial management as a major area, financial and digital literacy. But I think also particularly for refugees in more middle income countries, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of projects, providing trainings on a lot of those soft skills that are really difficult, including for us. So thinking, particularly about writing CVs and interviewing are usually not skills that come naturally to most of us, and that all of us need training in. And so we're seeing a lot of that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. So I will ask one last question to our panelists, and I already see some questions posed in the chat. Don't hesitate to add more of questions that have come up as we've, talked about the upskilling, the cross-sector collaboration, or other topics during the session. And so maybe one of the last questions I would like to ask is thinking about how do you adapt in the face of different crises, and notably the COVID crisis that hopefully we'll be out of it soon. But how, has this, in one sense, it's really played a very divisive role in certain areas. And it's also in some contexts when we talk about the need for example, digital skills, really accelerated that and also shown the need for being more digitally connected in our world today. So maybe a question to the panelists regarding your thoughts of a crisis like this. What has it meant? What have you seen also that has come out, maybe negative in the sense that there was a lot more of the frontline work that also needed to be addressed, but also maybe if there was also any not positive outcomes, but things that really helped also accelerate us forward in terms of thinking about more innovative or creative solutions to adapt in the face of the different challenges we had these past 2 years.
I can come in briefly, Jean. Yeah, I think you said it right. One of the lessons we took from the COVID time is the power of the digital world, and somehow the world of work has been transformed in different settings. Of course, it depends where you are, which setting, which population group one is located in. And also it puts on our face the digital divide that exists, depending on the different countries, the segment of the population one is in. Of course, looking at access, one is accessories. When we talk about the digital livelihood, digital skills, all these things, accessories are key as well. Internet, it is affordable. That's one that also broadened the divide. Literacy, digital literacy is also quite, we all struggle. When you connect in this call, we always face challenges, and looking at the target, the population that we're working with, and the challenge is even immense. So how do we address these things? There are, I think, a lot of challenges are out there. But looking at the mobile phone, I think one of the most accessible and something that transforms several ways of working and also opens access for the market for many groups, vulnerable groups, hard to reach communities. They can, for example, if you look at digital financing, it is flourishing around the world. Farmers can access market information using their phones. That's the limited one, but how can we make it to the other level? How can we upgrade this to other levels of digital livelihoods as well? It's important to look at broader long-term interventions. Of course, there are, you guys are, Jean, I know you're involved, and Lorraine as well, in piloting and developing a digital livelihood program for refugees. These are great because they will show what may work, but we need to also look at the broader level, working with educational authorities from the ground up to make sure that digital literacy is part and parcel of general discussion, general education, and the service providers, internet providers are also making broader investments and provide cheaper services, affordable internet access to the different population. And of course, we have to also look at working with country level government office, regional like the East African Commission, the IGAD, at the regional level, African Union or UN, ITU, that need to make this part and parcel of their daily operation, so that we know that it's important, but to take it forward, it cannot be addressed looking at silo operations. It is big, it has to get bigger, and it requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of engagement from different sectors. Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in as well. I think thinking of the broader context here, the pandemic definitely hurt refugees and migrants in ways that reach far beyond the risk of the virus itself. Rediet, you touched on some of these points, but I'll share two examples. The first is that we know that refugees have disproportionately felt the economic repercussions of the pandemic. As businesses and workplaces closed, reopened, closed again, a lot of refugees who have fairly precarious livelihoods, their jobs were often the first to go. There was research done by the Center for Global Development that found that 60% of employed refugees work in highly impacted sectors, sectors that were highly impacted by the economic downturn. And I think this was relative to 35% of populations in host countries. So refugees were working in, typically work in food services, transport, the hotel industry, wholesale or retail trade, a lot of sectors that were particularly vulnerable to the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. In many countries, we know that refugees work in the informal sector, which means that they have less job security and are less protected against job or income loss. We also know that women are overrepresented in the informal economy at large, and within this are overrepresented in those highly impacted sectors. And so in addition to losing their jobs and livelihoods as a result of the economic downturn and the pandemic, what it really means is that a lot of refugees and displaced people could no longer afford to pay rent, could no longer afford daily necessities such as food or medication, which in turn increases their vulnerability. So that's one piece I think to keep in mind when we're thinking about sustainable livelihoods, when we're thinking about the impact of the pandemic, is that refugees are and have been disproportionately affected by the economic repercussions. Compounding that is a second piece, which is that refugee status often prevents many refugees from accessing government-provided healthcare or social safety nets, which also further increases their vulnerability. So we know in several countries where governments have provided subsidies to offset the economic impact of the pandemic, or helped school children with distance learning, forcibly displaced persons often didn't have access to such measures. And so the question then becomes, how do we both respond to this? I think, Jean, that was in your original question. How do we adapt and respond to the situation, but also how do we think ahead and put in place programming that is sort of future-proof for these shocks? Again, I think that's sort of where the idea of self-reliance comes in. It's sort of both adapting to the current realities, but also trying to build that longer-term resilience. And so I wanted to offer a bit of that context because I think it aligns very nicely with Rediet, the points that you were making around what's needed. Digital skills are certainly central to the world that all of us live in. That's very much the case for refugees as well. There's no distinction there. And so it's really up to us to adapt our programming. RefugePoint did this. We run a program for urban refugees in Nairobi. Many of our partners have done this as well. But when the pandemic hit, we pivoted our programming. We switched to remote check-ins, to maintain the safety of our staff and our clients. But in order to facilitate that, we had to make sure that our clients had access to secure communication channels, that they had access to mobile phones, that they had phone credit. For our clients that we support with livelihoods training, a lot of entrepreneurs we provided them with mobile phones so that they could use digital marketing through WhatsApp to market their products, since there were a lot of restrictions in gathering in person. So, there's sort of smaller scale interventions like that. But it's all, again, I think it's along the spectrum of being adaptive in the moment, but also thinking about the types of education, apprenticeships, opportunities that we want to build and offer to refugees so that they are able to, like the rest of us, compete and live and transact in an environment that is so heavily dependent and will continue to be on digital skills as well. So that's both thinking about how do we build those education and opportunity sort of skills pathways, but also how do we facilitate that through providing access to the infrastructure through things like mobile phones and credit in some cases.
I think I'll be very brief, but Simar, I think you made really good points. Rediet, I think you've also made excellent points, so I don't have too much to add, but I think one other important component to think about, and Simar, you were hinting at this, is that during COVID-19, really, we need to be cognizant that really the protection space for refugees became much closer and more difficult to navigate. Of course, COVID-19, as we're talking about this, and thinking about the digital divide, I think it's presented, as I've said before, so many opportunities, I think, for collaboration with refugees themselves, with their host communities, but also with our partners. But I think it's also presenting risks, and we need to think about how to manage and mitigate those. And so how do we balance both taking advantage of those opportunities while also thinking about those risks that are being presented? I think one of the things that we need to think about is just making sure that we're protecting the data of refugees. I think as we move more and more towards this digital kind of world, and data is everywhere on the internet, how do we also make sure that we're protecting people as we expand all of these great opportunities? I would say by and large, this is a huge opportunity. We've seen ability to access so many more people much more easily. We've shifted to an opportunity where we can engage much more closely with our colleagues in the field, which has been really fantastic. But as we've all seen, I think personally within the United States, even this also presents a lot of opportunities for folks to take advantage of other people. So how do we make sure that we're being cognizant of that as well? But otherwise, I think I agree with my two other colleagues.
No, thank you. And I think as we kind of further develop, I think it's also being cognizant of, in one sense, people have been disproportionately impacted, and on the other end, how do we use this as a way to creatively adapt, even go further on a lot of these challenges. So I want to turn it over quite briefly to Lorraine so that we can get some time in for questions I saw in the chat, and then we'll end with a brief conclusion in the last 2 minutes.
Thanks, great, everyone. You were fantastic, really, really interesting insights. I just want to get quickly to a couple of questions. Mushiga asked a really interesting question, saying that some refugees come to countries and which have a high unemployment rate and start their own businesses, but these are overlooked by funders. How do we help refugees grow their own initiatives to create solutions for their own problems?
Yeah, I can quickly jump into that one. I think it's an excellent question, and it's really the reality that that we see for so many of our refugee clients who, as you rightly said, have their own ideas. They have they have the ambition to grow their own businesses, but really what they are unable to access a lot of the times is that startup capital, or really the investment to sort of grow their initiatives. RefugePoint has been sort of paying attention to this, and we in the last year have been working with a number of refugee-led and community-based organizations and initiatives in Nairobi, which is where we have a big program as well. And we really started by reaching out to community-based organizations, refugee-led organizations, and asked them the question, what support do you need? Before we come in and start providing support, sharing the knowledge and capacity that we have, that we're very eager to share, we wanted to hear first from these groups themselves, what do they need? And what we heard was that what they're looking for are investments, certainly in their enterprises and in their initiatives, but they also need support on soft skills, on things related to finance, and really building that infrastructure to set up a successful organization. That helped us challenge our assumptions for what kind of capacity sharing we were gearing up to do. And so, I would say that's one of the things to keep in mind is to ask refugees, especially those who have initiatives that they're running, what it is that they're looking for. For us as an agency, we see ourselves both as a funder, a capacity sharer, but also more importantly as a facilitator and connector. So we've been taking these messages and the information that we receive from refugees and sharing it with our funder network to see if we can help facilitate those connections as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Rediet, I don't know if you want to jump into this being an organization that funds. Anyone else?
No, I think it's covered. Simar covered it very well.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing else to add.
Yes, go ahead, Anna. Okay. I'll ask one quick question because our time is coming to an end. If anyone can talk very briefly about the whole issue of documentation and validating skills that refugees gained in one country, how can this be transferred to the new country?
I think it goes. I can take it beyond maybe certification and accreditation in the new country. It's broadly about the rights of refugees. It also goes to access to land, access to finance. Simari mentioned they need finance, but microfinance institutions will not give them the required resources. It goes beyond. So it's looking at what's needed at the broader level to make sure that refugees also receive somehow an fairly equal treatment as the host members as well. It requires a lot of advocacy, a lot of engagement with governments, and I'm sure all of you that everyone in this group is indirectly or directly participating in it. There are a lot of progress in different countries, but there is a long way to go. The challenge is immense. I think I will not look at it only from the certification angle, but broadly looking at the rights of refugees in the country that they call home after leaving their country. Thank you.
Can I add in one point? Oh no, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say we're seeing this a lot, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. In Colombia, the government has done this tremendous amount of work on framing refugee and migrant employment as a factor of development. So for Venezuelans with professional experience, they've worked with the Guaido administration to come up with a workaround for people to get their professional certifications revalidated so that people can work in their professions in Colombia. So the government of Colombia has really seen this as an opportunity for them to fill gaps in terms of their own professions. And so what we're doing with a lot of our programs is to identify what certifications are available in the Venezuelan community, and walking people through that recertification process and usually helping them pay for those recertifications, which frequently can be pretty expensive, or trainings to get them up to speed. So we are seeing a lot of this. This is something we're acutely aware of, and it's low-hanging fruit that we're often addressing.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I think that's a fantastic way to end on the rights of refugees and how can we find a way for refugees to be employed at their skill level. So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel, Jean, Allegra, even though you didn't speak, Anna, Simar, and Rediet. Thank you so much for all these fantastic insights. Everyone else in our audience, thank you for being here. There's some sessions right after this, so look at our schedule. And we have some other sessions related to refugee employment coming up. We have one on employment rights and one on labor mobility pathways. So see you soon, see you later today or tomorrow or next week. Thank you, everyone, and have a really wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.